The untold story of Tom Riddle's Gaunt legacy in a crumbling shack. On the outskirts of Little Hangleton, 3 figures huddled in squalor that would have shocked even the poorest wizard families. This was the home of the Gaunts, the last remnants of Salazar Slytherin's bloodline, though you wouldn't know it from their circumstances. Marvolo Gaunt, the family patriarch, was a man consumed by pride in his pure-blood heritage. His fingers bore 2 precious rings, one with the Peverell coat of arms containing a black stone, and another bearing the Slytherin crest. These were the only valuable things left in their hovel. Yet Marvolo clung to them like lifelines to a glorious past that had long since rotted away. His son Morfin was a violent, unstable man who spoke primarily in Persultang and harbored a deep hatred for Muggles. His daughter Merope was different, timid, plain, and seemingly without the magical power that ran in their bloodline. What they didn't know was that her magic was suppressed by years of abuse and terror. Then came the day that changed everything. Tom Riddle Sr., a handsome young Muggle from the village's wealthy family, began riding past their shack. Merope watched him from the shadows, and something stirred within her, not just attraction, but a desperate hunger for escape from the hell that was her life. The enchantment when old Marvolo was imprisoned in Azkaban for attacking ministry officials, and Morfin was taken away for hexing Muggles. Merope found herself alone for the first time in her life. The oppressive weight of her family's presence lifted, and with it, her magic began to flow freely. She began to follow Tom Riddle Sr. through the village, learning his routines, his preferences, his dreams. Then, with a combination of love potions and enchantments that she brewed in secret, she ensnared him completely. The proud Muggle who had once looked through her as if she were invisible, now saw her as the most beautiful woman in the world. They eloped, fleeing to London, where they lived as man and wife. For a brief, shining moment, Merope tasted happiness, but happiness built on lies is fragile, and as her pregnancy progressed, she made a fateful decision. Perhaps it was love, perhaps it was hope, or perhaps it was simply exhaustion, but she stopped giving Tom the love potions. The enchantment shattered like glass. Tom Riddle Sr. awoke as if from a terrible dream, horrified to find himself married to a woman he barely remembered, carrying a child he never wanted. Without a word of explanation or a moment's hesitation, he fled back to Little Hangleton, leaving Merope alone, pregnant and utterly broken, the birth of a monster and a snowy new. Year's Eve in 1926, Merope Gaunt stumbled into Wool's Orphanage in London. She was dying, whether from a broken heart, magical exhaustion, or simply the will to live having left her, no one could say. She had just enough strength to give birth to a son and speak his name. Tom Marvolo Riddle, after the father who had abandoned them and the grandfather who had tormented her. With a dying breath, she pressed something into the matron's hands, a locket bearing the Slytherin crest, the only thing of value she had left. Then she was gone, leaving behind only a child whose very existence was born from deception and abandonment. The beautiful Devilton Riddle grew up in the orphanage, but he was unlike any child the matron, Mrs. Cole, had ever seen. Even as a baby, he rarely cried. As a toddler, he would watch the other children with an intensity that made the staff uncomfortable. By age 5, he was strikingly handsome, with dark hair, pale skin, and eyes that seemed to see right through you. But it was his charm that truly set him apart. Tom learned early that his smile could get him out of trouble, that his polite words could earn him extra portions at dinner, that his sad eyes could make visitors slip him coins. He was a master manipulator before he even understood what manipulation was. The other children feared him, though they couldn't explain why. Strange things happened around Tom. A bully would find his most treasured possession missing. A child who crossed him would have terrible nightmares, and once, a boy who had stolen Tom's book was found hanging by his ankles from the ceiling, though no one could explain how he'd gotten there. When Tom was 8, he discovered he could make animals do his bidding. He would take other children into the caves near the orphanage, and what happened there stayed with them forever. 2 children never spoke normally again after one of these trips. The revelation varying changed the day Professor Dumbledore walked into Wool's Orphanage. Tom had been expecting someone like him. He'd always known he was different, special, destined for something greater than the grey walls and thin gruel of orphan life. But even Dumbledore, with all his wisdom and experience, felt a chill when he met 11-year-old Tom Riddle. The boy was too controlled, too calculating, too empty of normal human warmth. When Dumbledore demonstrated magic by setting his wardrobe on fire, Tom didn't gasp in wonder like most children would. Instead, he smiled a cold, satisfied smile that said, "I knew it." Tom had questions, of course, not about magic. He'd already figured out he could do impossible things. No, he wanted to know about his parents, about his name, about weather. His father had been a wizard too. When Dumbledore told him his mother had died and his father had been a Muggle, something shifted in Tom's expression. It was subtle, but Dumbledore caught it, a flash of rage, of humiliation, of something that might have been grief if Tom had been capable of such an emotion. The Hogwarts years, the mask perfected at Hogwarts, Tom Riddle became everything the teachers dreamed of in a student. He was brilliant, achieving top marks in every subject. He was charming, well-mannered and helpful. He was a natural leader, quickly gathering a group of followers who hung on his every word. But Dumbledore watched, and Dumbledore saw what others missed. Tom's followers weren't friends, they were tools. He chose them carefully, the wealthy ones for their connections, the ambitious ones for their usefulness, the cruel ones for their willingness to do what others wouldn't. He never showed them his true self, never let them see beyond the mask of perfection he wore. In his second year, when the Chamber of Secrets was opened, Tom saw an opportunity. He had already discovered he could speak to serpents, had already begun to piece together his heritage. When students started turning up petrified, Tom played the part of the concerned hero, even earning a special award for services to the school when he supposedly caught the culprit. But late at night, in the depths of the castle, Tom would slip away to the Chamber of Secrets. He would stand before the great statue of Salazar Slytherin and speak in Parseltongue to the basilisk that lurked within. This was where he truly belonged, not among the sheep who populated the school above, but here in the darkness, commanding, a creature of legend. The Horcrux discovery. It was during his 6th year that Tom made the discovery that would define the rest of his existence. Professor Slughorn, the potions master, had always been fond of Tom. The boy was brilliant, charming, and came from one of the old families, everything Slughorn valued in his collection of promising students. Tom had been researching immortality in the restricted section, devouring every dark text he could find. But the information was incomplete, frustratingly vague. He needed details, and he knew exactly who might provide them. The conversation took place after one of Slughorn's parties, when the professor was mellowed by crystallized pineapple and good wine. Tom approached with his usual perfect manners, his questions seemingly academic, theoretical. But Slughorn, even in his cups, felt a chill as Tom pressed for more information about Horcruxes. But how many, sir? How many Horcruxes could someone make? Theoretically, of course. Well, one would be the most stable, naturally. The soul is meant to be whole, you see. But I suppose, theoretically, 7 would be the most magical number. Tom's eyes lit up with a terrible hunger. 7 pieces of his soul, scattered and hidden, ensuring that even if his body died, he would persist. The conversation ended with Slughorn's uncomfortable laughter and a change of subject, but the damage was done. Tom had learned what he needed to know. The first murder that summer, Tom returned to Little Hangleton for the first time since his birth. He had spent months researching his family, tracing his mother's lineage back to the Gaunts, discovering his connection to Salazar Slytherin. Now, he wanted to see where it all began. He found the Gaunt shack easily enough, and inside, his uncle Morphin, older, more unstable, but still recognizably a Gaunt. Tom didn't announce himself immediately. Instead, he watched, he planned, he prepared. When he finally revealed himself, it was with a carefully crafted story. He claimed to be investigating the Riddle family, to be writing a book about local history. Morphin, in his confused state, began. to ramble about the rich Muggles up in the big house, about how they thought they were better than everyone else. "That's my father's house," Tom said quietly. Morfin's eyes widened. You're the boy." "Her boy? The one who came back to lord it over us?" Tom smiled, but it was a smile that would have frozen blood. "No, Uncle. I'm the one who's going to make things right." That night, Tom walked up to Riddle House. He let himself in through the back door, moving like a shadow through the halls where his father had grown up in comfort. While Tom had known only the grey walls of the orphanage, he found them in the drawing room. His father, his grandfather, his grandmother, the Riddle family, complete and content, having no idea that their past was about to catch up with them. Tom looked at his father for a long moment. Tom Riddle Sr. was still handsome, still proud, still utterly unaware that he had once been married to a witch and had fathered a wizard. He looked at his son without recognition, seeing only a strange young man who had somehow gotten into his house. "Who are you?" Tom Riddle Sr. demanded. "What do you want?" "I'm your son," Tom said simply, "and I want you to know what you've done." The killing curse came easily to his lips, as if he'd been born to speak it. 3 flashes of green light, and the Riddle family was no more. But Tom wasn't finished. He returned to the Gaunt shack, where he found Morfin exactly as he'd left him, confused, rambling. Perfect for what came next. A few memory charms, a planted wand. And suddenly Morfin Gaunt was the obvious culprit for the Riddle murders. That night, Tom returned to his London flat and created his first Horcrux. He took his father's ring, the one with the black stone that had once belonged to the Peverills, and poured a piece of his torn soul into it. The process was agony, but when it was done, Tom felt something he had never experienced before, the knowledge that he was truly beyond death. The charming graduate. When Tom graduated from Hogwarts, he was offered positions at the Ministry of Magic. That would have set him up for a brilliant career in wizarding politics. But Tom had other plans. He wanted to learn about the dark arts, to discover more magical objects that could serve as Horcruxes, to build his power base away from the watchful eyes of Dumbledore and the Ministry. He took a job at Borgin and Burkes, a shop in Nocturne Alley that specialized in dark artifacts. To his colleagues, he was the perfect employee, knowledgeable, charming, and incredibly skilled at convincing customers to part with their most precious possessions. But Tom had a talent that went beyond mere salesmanship. He could look at a person and know exactly what they wanted to hear, exactly what their weaknesses were, exactly how to make them trust him completely. Old witches and wizards would come into the shop planning to browse, and leave having sold family heirlooms that had been in their families for generations. It was during this time that Tom acquired some of his most precious Horcruxes. He convinced an elderly witch named Hepzibah Smith to show him her most prized possessions, a cup that had belonged to Helga Hufflepuff and a locket that had once been Salazar Slytherin's. Within days, Hepzibah was dead, apparently from a heart attack, and both artifacts had vanished. Tom also used his position to research other founders' artifacts, tracking down rumors and legends that might lead him to more suitable objects for his Horcruxes. He was methodical, patient, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of immortality. The transformation begins as Tom created more Horcruxes. Something began to change in him. His handsome features started to shift, becoming more snake-like, more inhuman. His eyes grew red, his skin became pale and waxy, his face flattened and distorted. Each act of murder, each splitting of his soul, took away more of his humanity. But it wasn't just his appearance that changed. His very nature became more alien, more monstrous. The charm that had once come so easily began to require more effort to maintain. His followers started to fear him as much as they revered him. Tom began to experiment with other forms of dark magic. He studied ancient rituals, forbidden curses, and twisted spells that no decent wizard would ever consider. He surrounded himself with the most ambitious and ruthless witches and wizards he could find, building the organization that would eventually become known as the Death Eaters. And through it all, he was driven by the memory of that snowy night, when he was born abandoned, unwanted, left to die in an orphanage while his father lived in comfort just miles away. Every murder, every act of cruelty, every step toward ultimate power was motivated by that original wound, that first betrayal. That had shaped everything he would become. The name that must not be spoke and final transformation came when Tom abandoned his birth name entirely. Tom Marvolo Riddle, the name that connected him to his Muggle father, and his tragic mother became an anagram, a puzzle that revealed his true identity. I am Lord Voldemort. In choosing this name, Tom completed his rejection of everything human. About himself, he was no longer the abandoned child or the charming student or even the ambitious young man. He was something else entirely, a creature of pure will and dark magic, sustained by murder and driven by a hunger for power that could never be satisfied. The boy who had once asked Professor Slughorn about Horcruxes with such innocent curiosity was gone forever. In his place stood Lord Voldemort, the Dark Lord who would plunge the wizarding world into its darkest age. But perhaps the most tragic part of Tom Riddle's story is not what he became, but what he might have been. In another world, in another timeline, the brilliant, charismatic boy might have used his gifts to heal rather than harm, to build rather than destroy. Instead, he chose the path of darkness, and the wizarding world would pay the price for decades to come. The boy who had never known love had become a man incapable of it. The child who had been abandoned had become a monster who would abandon all humanity. And the student who had once seemed so promising had become the greatest threat the wizarding world had ever known. This is the untold story of Tom Riddle, not just the facts that the movies left out, but the deeper truth of how a human being can transform himself into something utterly inhuman, one choice at a time, one murder at a time, one piece of soul at a time.